I'm starting with the sides, and I needed something flexible to draw a consistent curve. I have a piece of PVC cove molding, and that worked out perfectly. I clamped it to one side and played around with the shape until I found something that I liked. This is my first time working with hickory, and going into this project, I knew that this was a very hard wood. And oh boy, it did not disappoint. This took a very long time to cut with the jigsaw. Off camera, I sanded the curve so that I can get it down to its final shape. And then I traced that onto the other side so I can cut out the second side of the bed frame. For this cut, I stayed away from the line, and then I used blue tape and CA glue to stick the two pieces together, making sure to have them line up on the ends. I'm using a pattern bit in the router to cut the second side identical to the first one. It's a very short bit, so I had to do this in 2 passes. For the second pass, I had the bit set a hair too low, and the space between the cutting area and the bearing left a little bit of wood behind. Thankfully, that just easily broke off. The last thing to do on the side pieces is to remove a section on either end so that the front and back pieces can sit into them. I had this piece that was the right size and traced it and just cut it out. The front and back pieces are made from 2 boards. They'll eventually get glued together, but I need to cut some joinery first. I want to create a half flap with the pieces where the top sits in the notches and the bottom sits in between the sides. And that just means I cut the boards at slightly different lengths. The top is the overall width of the bed, and the bottom is that length minus the width of the side pieces. One last thing to do is to cut a notch in the center of the bottom board, and that's where the center support of the bed will go later. Now I can glue the top and bottom boards together and making sure to keep the proper overhang on either end. And I'm checking that using a scrap from the side pieces. Once that dried, I clamped the front, back, and sides together upside down so that I can measure and cut out the center support. The main components of the bed are basically done at this point, so I started making the front leg. I glued 2 boards together to make the stretcher a little bit thicker. I could have started with some thicker hickory, but this is what my local lumberyard had in stock. Once that dried, I cut a curve on the bandsaw, and cut an angle on either end with the table saw. I think I went with about 7 degrees here. I'm also doubling up the thickness on the feet. I have enough material in cutoffs to get all those pieces, but I first cut out one so I can figure out its final shape, and then use that to trace out the rest of the pieces. I glued those together just like I did everything else. When it came time to glue the feet to the stretcher, I saved the cutoffs from the stretcher and taped them to the outside of the feet. This way it's easier to clamp everything together, so I have a straight line for the clamp. I clamped the stretcher to my workbench to make things a little bit easier. I added glue to the feet and then quickly realized that the squeeze out from the glue will clamp the entire leg assembly to my workbench. So I unclamped everything and added blue tape under the joints. Packing tape would have worked out a little bit better because wood glue doesn't stick to that, but this worked out just fine. I clamped all the pieces to my workbench to keep it all in line, and then I used one long clamp to squeeze the 3 pieces together. Things were going great, but they're not going great anymore. So this is the design of it. The tops and the bottom still need to get cut off, but I was gluing up this joint and I was using dowels, which I do not like the look of, so I got to change that. But also this joint did not close up nearly as well as I wanted it to. So I'm going to clean my bench because it's a mess and get back to this tomorrow. It was getting a little frustrating, but I think I have a way to fix this. But it's a project for future me, not present me. The next day I made a new stretcher, and this time I decided to attach the feet to the stretcher with a bridle joint. This will end up looking much cleaner and it's a much stronger joint. When cutting the tenon, I can cut 2 shoulders with the miter gauge set to 7 degrees, but not the other 2 because I already cut the curve on the bottom and that would throw off the angle. So I flipped the miter gauge around and I used it backwards. It worked great and it was a super simple solution where I don't have to move the stop block and change the angle on the miter gauge. From there, I just took multiple passes to remove the rest of the material. I cut the feet off of the old stretcher so that I can reuse them, and I cut the top off so that it matches the angle on the new stretcher. Next up, I have to cut the mortise in the foot, and at the time, this cut felt fine and felt safe for me to make, but watching this footage back makes me a little bit nervous. A better way to do this is to make a sled that hooks over the fence with a reference for the foot to register against, and clamp the foot down. Something similar to a spline jig. I don't recommend doing it the way that I did it. I removed most of the rest of the material with the bandsaw, but because of the angle, I had to do some out of focus chisel work. Now I can glue it all together, and this glue up went much smoother than the first one. It just shows that taking time to cut joinery really pays off, and I only needed 2 clamps for this. Once that dried, I cut the feet to their final size, and I had just enough material to make this the right length. At this point, I reviewed all the parts and noticed some small amounts of tear out in some areas. To fix this, I used Starbond CA glue in brown. It comes in a couple of different colors to match your project, and once finish was applied, it wasn't even noticeable. If you want to pick some up, you can follow the link in the description and use JT Woodworks 10 to get 10% off your order. I could have glued all the parts together, but I wanted the option to take the bed apart in the future. So I pre-drilled and screwed everything together. I'm working with the bed frame upside down, and I'm starting with the center support in the front and back pieces. The front of the side pieces can easily get screwed in from underneath, but the back needs to get screwed in from the top. So I clamped it all together and awkwardly flipped it around.
What, 12,000 people? Not that. 12,000 people is like half of City Field in New York. Like, you know, it's 25,000 people.
With the back piece secure, now I can attach the front leg. I used the stretcher that I messed up on to cut some pieces to help support the weight on the back and the center piece of the frame. I added a strip on either side to support the slats, and I used a spacer to maintain the proper height along the entire length of the strip. I was planning on using 1x3 furring strips, but when I went to go pick up the material, I saw these shiplap boards. These came out to be a third of the price, and all I needed to do was cut the tongue off of either end and cut them into 3-inch sections. I want to take a second and let you know that I just launched the Patreon. If you got to this point in the video, chances are you like what I do, and Patreon is a great way for you to help me produce more content like these videos and plans. Not only do you get better and more frequent content, but you also get special rewards starting at just $1 a month. So if you're interested, check out the link below. Thanks. I found this board that had a sapwood streak running along one side with clear grain in the rest of the board, and I knew that I wanted to make this the headboard. I joined the sapwood edge to get a clean glue surface on both pieces. Then I cut slots with the biscuit joiner. These biscuits help hold the boards in line with each other during the glue up. With the glue dry, I cut a detail on the corners and added a round over to all the edges. After a bit of sanding, I added some finish, and the bed was done. The only thing left to do is to stare at it.